Imagine ancient Athens, bathed in the golden light of the Aegean sun, its marble structures gleaming under the clear blue sky. This bustling city, the birthplace of democracy, was a vibrant tapestry of philosophers, artists, and citizens engaged in passionate debate, each contributing to the rich cultural and intellectual life of the city. The streets thrummed with a revolutionary idea. The power of governance rested not in the hands of a king or a small elite, but in the hands of the people. This was a radical departure from the norm, a bold experiment in collective decision-making. Every Athenian citizen, regardless of wealth or social standing, had the right to participate in the political process. This inclusivity was unprecedented and marked a significant shift in the way societies were governed. This was direct democracy in action, a radical experiment that set Athens apart from the autocratic regimes of its time. Citizens gathered in the assembly to vote on laws and policies, their voices shaping the future of their city. Athenian democracy, however, was not without its flaws. The system, while groundbreaking, had significant limitations and was far from perfect. This system, while groundbreaking, was limited in its scope. The ideal of equality was not fully realized, and many were left out of the democratic process. Only free men born in Athens were considered citizens, excluding women, slaves, and foreigners from the political arena. This exclusion meant that a significant portion of the population had no voice in the decisions that shaped their lives. This meant that a significant portion of the Athenian population had no voice in the decisions that shaped their lives. The disenfranchised groups, including women, slaves, and foreigners, were left on the margins of society. Despite these limitations, the Athenian experiment in democracy was a bold and innovative step. It was a pioneering effort that laid the groundwork for future democratic systems. It laid the groundwork for modern democratic systems and sparked centuries of debate about the nature of governance and the role of the citizen. The principles established in Athens continue to influence political thought and practice around the world. The Athenian experiment, however, was not without its critics. The debates and discussions often highlighted the system's shortcomings and areas for improvement. Among them was a philosopher named Socrates, whose searing critiques of Athenian democracy continue to resonate even today. His questioning of the democratic process and its effectiveness remains a significant part of the discourse on governance. Athenian democracy, in its purest form, was a system of direct participation. Every citizen, in theory, had an equal say in the affairs of the state. This meant that citizens could directly vote on laws, policies, and even matters of war and peace. Imagine the bustling assembly, a sea of raised hands deciding the fate of the city. This participatory approach fostered a sense of civic responsibility and engagement that was unparalleled in the ancient world. However, this system of direct democracy also had its drawbacks. The most glaring was the issue of qualification. In the Athenian system, every citizen, regardless of their knowledge or expertise, had an equal vote. This meant that a skilled craftsman had the same voting power as a seasoned general on matters of war, or a farmer on matters of trade. This lack of specialized knowledge in decision-making troubled many, including Socrates. Critics like Socrates argued that governing a state, like any complex endeavor, required expertise and judgment. They worried that important decisions would be left in the hands of the uninformed and easily swayed by rhetoric and emotion. They feared that the Athenian system, while idealistic in its pursuit of equality, could ultimately undermine the very stability and effectiveness of the state. Socrates, a gadfly of Athens, roamed the marketplace and engaged his fellow citizens in endless debate. He questioned everything, especially the unquestioned assumptions of Athenian democracy. While many celebrated the virtues of popular rule, Socrates harbored deep reservations about the capacity of the masses to govern wisely. He believed that governing justly and effectively required not just good intentions, but also knowledge, wisdom, and a deep understanding of justice and virtue. He argued that most citizens, preoccupied with their daily lives, lacked the time, education, and inclination to develop such qualities. He feared that they were susceptible to manipulation by skilled orators and demagogues who could sway their opinions with emotional appeals rather than sound reasoning. Socrates' critique stemmed from a deep-seated belief in the importance of reason and expertise in governance. He argued that just as one wouldn't trust an untrained individual to pilot a ship or perform surgery, one shouldn't entrust the complex task of governing to the uninformed masses. This belief formed the crux of his famous analogy of the ship of state, a powerful metaphor that exposed what he saw as the inherent flaws in Athenian democracy. Section 4. The ship of state, a captain, not a crowd. Imagine a ship sailing on the open sea, Socrates would urge his listeners. Picture the vast expanse of water, the unpredictable waves, and the distant horizon. The ship represents the state, and its passengers are the citizens. Each person on board has a role, a purpose, and a stake in the journey. The journey represents the pursuit of a just and prosperous society. It is a voyage filled with challenges, opportunities, and the need for careful navigation. Now, imagine if the crew, instead of a skilled captain, was chosen by popular vote. The deck would be filled with voices, each clamoring for attention, each convinced of their own direction. Imagine further that these self-appointed sailors, lacking any knowledge of navigation, charts, or winds, started issuing commands based on their whims and desires. The ship would be at the mercy of the elements, directionless and vulnerable. This, Socrates argued, was akin to allowing the state to be steered by the whims of the unqualified masses. It was a recipe for chaos and disaster. He believed that just as a ship needed a skilled captain to guide it safely to its destination, the state needed knowledgeable and virtuous leaders to make sound decisions. These leaders, like the captain, must understand the complexities of governance and the art of leadership. The ship of state analogy resonated deeply with his listeners. It painted a vivid picture of the perils of unqualified leadership and the importance of expertise. It exposed the dangers of equating democracy with simple majority rule and highlighted the need for expertise and wisdom in governance. Socrates' analogy was a call for thoughtful and informed decision-making. However, this analogy also drew sharp criticism. Not everyone agreed with Socrates' perspective. Detractors accused Socrates of elitism, arguing that it undermined the very essence of democracy, which was to empower the people. They felt that his views were dismissive of the collective wisdom and potential of the populace. They argued that Socrates' analogy failed to consider the collective wisdom of the people and the inherent dangers of placing absolute power in the hands of a select few. They believed in the strength of a diverse and inclusive decision-making process. This debate, sparked centuries ago, continues to this day. The tension between expertise and popular will remains a central theme in discussions about governance and democracy. Section 5. The Peloponnesian War, a fatal miscalculation. The Peloponnesian War, a decades-long conflict between Athens and Sparta, cast a long shadow over Socrates' life and provided a stark illustration of his concerns about Athenian democracy. This devastating war, sparked by a series of Athenian miscalculations, exposed the dangers of impulsive decision-making driven by popular sentiment. The Athenian assembly, swayed by the fiery rhetoric of demagogues, made a series of strategic blunders that ultimately led to their defeat. The disastrous Sicilian expedition, for instance, a reckless gamble championed by the charismatic but ultimately incompetent General Alcibiades, ended in catastrophic defeat for Athens. This military disaster, a direct result of the Athenian assembly's flawed judgment, weakened Athens and paved the way for their eventual subjugation by the Spartans. The Peloponnesian War served as a cautionary tale, highlighting the potential for disastrous consequences when crucial decisions are left in the hands of the uninformed and easily swayed. It underscored Socrates' argument that while democracy aspires for the common good, it could be easily susceptible to manipulation and prone to making rash decisions with devastating consequences. This historical event solidified Socrates' skepticism toward Athenian democracy. Section 6. The Trial of Socrates, Democracy's Dark Side. Socrates' life, marked by his relentless questioning of authority and tradition, came to a tragic end in 399 BC. His journey from a respected philosopher to a condemned man is a tale that echoes through the annals of history. He was accused of impiety and corrupting the youth of Athens, charges that stemmed from his criticisms of Athenian democracy and his association with individuals who had betrayed the city. These accusations were not just legal charges, but were deeply rooted in the political and social tensions of the time. His trial, a defining moment in Athenian history, provided a chilling example of democracy's potential to turn against itself. It highlighted the precarious balance between freedom of speech and the will of the majority. Socrates, facing a jury of his fellow citizens, mounted a defiant defense. He stood firm in his beliefs, refusing to pander to the crowd or seek their favor. He argued that his role as a philosopher was to question, to challenge, and to expose hypocrisy, even if it meant standing against the tide of popular opinion. His commitment to truth and virtue was unwavering, even in the face of death. He argued that he was a gadfly, stinging the lazy horse of Athenian democracy, urging it to live up to its ideals. His metaphor was powerful, illustrating his belief that a true democracy must be constantly prodded and questioned to remain just and fair. However, his defense fell on deaf ears. The jury, swayed by fear and prejudice, chose to silence the voice that dared to challenge the status quo. He was found guilty by a narrow margin and sentenced to death. This verdict was not just a personal tragedy for Socrates, but a profound commentary on the vulnerabilities of democratic systems. Socrates' trial, a poignant symbol of the fragility of democratic institutions, continues to spark debate about the nature of free speech, the limits of dissent, and the very essence of justice. It challenges us to reflect on our own societies and the ways in which we handle dissenting voices. It serves as a stark reminder that democracy, for all its virtues, is not a guarantee against injustice, and that the will of the majority, if not tempered by reason and a commitment to fundamental rights, can be a tool of oppression. The story of Socrates urges us to remain vigilant, to protect the principles of justice and freedom, and to ensure that our democratic institutions do not fall prey to the same pitfalls.